I think that's a little bit too honest, for my opinion.
Well, Simon is a talent.
No.
I've said this many a times. This is my puppy, but I'm kind of like the Rick Hendrick of the deal. You know, I probably couldn't race a car worth of crap, but I know how to put the right people in them, and that's what I've done with Simon over here. So I just sit back and operate the show and let him go out there and win all the races for me.
I do my best, Billy. I do my best.
Well, with that being said.
Oh, no, you can't start the show with that comment.
What comment?
With that being said, we're going to eradicate that comment from the vocabulary. It drives me up the wall. It's just a personal thing.
Did I say it?
Yes, you did.
Oh, I said with that being said.
Yes, you did. I'm going to choke you. And you're in range.
Almost as bad as be that as it may.
Oh, yes, exactly. Well, and we'll circle back on that.
Well, now,
no, we won't.
Now that I know, with that being said, now that I know what really grinds Simon's gears, I'm going to have a little bit of fun with that. So if you're listening, start sending me some comments on X or Facebook or whatever, different little puns or whatever that is right there that just got his panties all in a twist.
They're just gap fillers.
Okay.
Silence is better. It makes much more of a statement. Oh, with that being said, whilst my brain engages, no.
Well, you got to have something when maybe in conversation, but when you're recording and stuff, you're having to segue into another conversation to keep the audience engaged. So
hang on.
He has a point.
He does have a point, but you're feigning professionalism here. I know what you're doing.
I have no earthly idea what in the world you're talking about. Can you explain to everybody what feigning professionalism means?
You're having a laugh, mate.
Anyways, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Appalachian Podcast. 2 minutes in before we can get our introduction in. I'm your host, Billy Riddle. With me is my red coat co-host, here to get put in his place for today's episode.
Oh, you may be surprised. You may be surprised how this turns out.
Was it on this show that I hear it somebody else, somewhere else, that, Paul Revere never said the British are coming. He was never riding through the streets, because why would he? That'd be like the cops busting in the door and saying, "Hey, the Americans are here." Well, no, they were all British back then. He was saying something. Well, I don't forget what he was calling them at the time.
The redcoats are coming.
Well, I don't think it was even redcoats. It was something else. It was something.
Regulars.
Regulars, yes. They said the regulars are coming. So, but history, it's funny how something as simple as that gets
twisted slightly.
Well, I think the British are coming sounds better. Because we say the regulars and all the kids in the class who are already, half twigged out in ADHD, you're going to be like, well, what's a regular? Yeah, if you say the British, like, oh, yeah, we fought them.
That'll be like Billy the Kid and his whatever the gang was, the regulators.
Yes, the regulators.
Right. Well, there we go. The regulars. Yes, the regular British Army.
Well, the regulators, and at least in the Young Guns movie version, were a whole lot cooler than anybody British I can think of, with the exception of a couple of Guy Ritchie movies. Oh, and you.
The delay there. The timing of that comment, Billy, was all in the timing. Thanks, mate.
Guy Ritchie has a new movie out, by the way.
Yes, he does.
I need to see it. It's about the Afghan translator or whatever, which is not really where I would expected him to go with a movie, but nor was the King Arthur, the one he did, the Sword in the Stone.
Which was brilliant as well.
I liked it. I fell asleep in the theater, but that wasn't because of the movie. It was because I was exhausted.
Well, there we go.
Anyways, we're back, and we got a great show for you here today with Brian and Jeremiah. We'll let them introduce themselves here in one quick second. Real quick. This is the Timcast IRL Studios. That's why sometimes I need like a light or something or notes or something. But we are back from the Timcast IRL Studios. Go check out Timcast. Great podcast. I enjoy listening to it because it's topical news. It kind of keeps me informed in the things that
middle of the road
that I'm not but it keeps me informed in some of the big topics that are going on that maybe I need to look into a little bit more. We just don't have the time as humans to. And I don't think we're built for all this information coming to us at one time. And I'm not trying to engage in all of it, but there's a few topics that at least lead you in a direction on. Go in there and they'll have their comments. They're good guests and they'll go back and forth over it. And, I can make up my own mind, which is about all I can really ask for. So go check out them. big supporters of the show. Also, and for one of our sponsors, there's been an awful rumor going on this week, and we're going to address this in the after show. But I just want everybody to know that it has been addressed by the person, who they allegedly did this to, has already addressed it and come out. So, the Rocky Mountain Burger Company, Brian, this whole not town bickering back and forth nonsense, but Brian has been super good to us. When I heard the rumor, I said that just makes no sense at all. And we'll talk about it in the after show a little bit, but the people who the rumor was perpetrated from, I'm not really sure what their intents were, but the company that allegedly was the victim here, they have already come together and spoken, and they understand it wasn't. Anyways, it just irritates us. I'm about to boil here because I'm so sick of because Rocky Mountain Burger Company has been great to us. They've been great to everybody that's ever come in there. They're hospitable. They are, the food is phenomenal, and we'll get into it later. But Rocky Mountain Burger Company, when you're coming in town, go in there. I always get the sunrise because it's got the egg and the bacon, a little bit of mayonnaise on there with the Cajun fries, and I always get about 5 wings too because. Why not?
Well, dismiss all that you've heard is all I can say at this point in time.
And we'll talk about it in the after show for subscribers or whatever. But just dismiss it in the meantime because it's been addressed and it's nonsense. But the people who are starting this nonsense and all this, I mean, we'll address them too here in the very near future because we got a pretty good idea who it is. And but either way, phenomenal supporters of this show. We're getting ready to sit down with Brian and a few other people around this town. And we've got a plan for DC coming up here in February, so that's real exciting. We'll have some more info on that. Also, Rocky Mountain Smokehouse, go down there. You want a little bit of a change from the burger, that's where you go down there and you get your barbecue. They got some phenomenal ribs. Their wings are pretty damn good, too. They're award-winning. Good drinks in there, too. And Buddy's a cool place to, Buddy's has let's go to a high school football or basketball game and then slide on over and get some barbecue afterwards. And the Burger Company has that, let's go in there and get a meal before a show. So they both serve their purposes in our town, both on little separate ends, but
and both great folks that run it.
Great folks that run it, huge supporters of us, and good food every time. And I don't say that look, I'm not. Neither one of them have ever given me a dime. They've given me a lot of favors, and they've helped us out along the way. But so I'm not the reason I reached out to them and told them I wanted to promote them and bring them on our show and talk about their restaurant because I like it, because it is good. So it's not that they're throwing me a crap ton of money to come on here and tell you all the time how good they are. I genuinely enjoy going there. I spend, if I'm going to go out to eat in town with my wife, that's where we're going to go. So if you want to hear more about that and everything else that's going on in some of our stuff for the after show, you just go to patreon.com/getontap. Become a subscriber over there. It's only a couple of dollars a month, and you're helping us with equipment, travel, things coming up here in the near future. Like I said, it's all getting invested right back into the community. We take the money you give us and I put it into this stuff to bring you all on here and promote your pages and promote what you're doing and this kind of stuff. And I mean, the advertisement, the promotion you get from, it's great because there's a network involved here. You got the Franklin County page on Facebook, the Stay Local page, which is connecting a lot of local businesses, farmers and stuff. So, it's not just, just one thing here. There's a lot you can do by supporting us, and a lot of places that money goes. So patreon.com/getontap and at GetOnTap for Venmo and Cash App. If you want to do a one-time donation, that always helps. I appreciate that. Did I forget anybody?
No, you hit all the big ones there, Billy. That's for sure.
I need to, and of course, Spike over there at We Are the Power. If you got a little bit extra money, you can go throw them a couple of dimes. Do that. They're coming around and trying to get people locally elected that have liberty values. Exactly what we push here. And if somebody's going to do it, he's going to do it. We're starting to team up with them and work with them a little bit more. So go give them a follow, and if you got a couple dollars here and there, the same all as well. Try to keep it as local as you can, but if there's going to be people out there that aren't quite local, but you want to see spreading our values in other places, that's a good place to do it. So a lot coming up here in the future. And with that being said...
Oh, you git.
Simon, I'm going to let you take over the hosting duties here for a moment because I know this is a show that you have been wanting to do for an awful long time. I've been wanting to do it as well. I've been waiting for the right time and the right opportunity. And I know the gentleman we have here today, you have a very strong relationship with. So I'm going to sit over here and I'm going to play Simon this show, and I'm going to let you go ahead and introduce them and tell us all why we're here today, because this is important.
Well, we've had a number of kind of gotcha moments with the BLM folks here and there. There's been a lot of concern politically, I think, about how a constitutional militia fits in with the community, and there's been so much I think just negative angles on it that have no basis in what the Franklin County militia is trying to do. There's been very little historical background in how that we should all be involved in this. But there's no better man to be here. We've got two guys that are absolutely committed to the Franklin County Militia, Brian Wood and Jeremiah DeBorde. I fully support the concept of militia service. I mean, this is a constitutional obligation. And
I just had things come. Okay, never.
I know. Poor old Billy's brain is spinning, and it's so it blows my mind that you've got an Englishman here supporting the constitutional dream of our founding fathers, and I find it kind of perverse that I'm pushing this, and I'm getting pushed back.
Well, there are a lot of negative stereotypes.
Well, and we'll come into that.
We're going to get to that.
But you know what? I'd like Brian to introduce himself. Brian's been a good friend of mine. We've known each other for a number of years. We have been on the militia roller coaster ride now for 3 years.
Yep, that's about right. Closing on 4.
Closing on 4. And, it gives me much pride to be involved.
Well, thank you for the introduction, Simon. My name is Brian Wood. I am president of Franklin County Militia Incorporated, and that is a not-for-profit, non-stock Virginia corporation. It was founded in January of 2022, and I think the best thing that we can do really is to kind of backtrack a little bit in time and talk about just why this movement became a thing, why people were so interested in militia. And for that, we need to go back to the 2018 elections when the Virginia state legislature flipped and control went to the Democrat Party. When they had their opening session on opening day, there were more than 1,600 bills that were filed in advance of the opening session. Of those, there were more than 16, I believe, that were directly relating to gun control. And some of those were outright bans on categories of certain firearms. And so there was an immediate pushback across the Commonwealth where citizens were very concerned that they were going to lose the ability to purchase or to own or to transfer certain types of firearms, semi-automatic long guns, semi-automatic rifles, standard capacity magazines, which come shipped with many of the pistols and rifles. And what happened was there was an immediate reflexive reaction by the people. They said, hey, let's gather about, and they showed up at their boards of supervisors meetings, prompted by some online activity, and they were asking their boards of supervisors to pass resolutions declaring that their county was a sanctuary county, and that anything that passed in Richmond would not be enforced in their counties.
It was a knee jerk to a knee jerk.
Exactly. Yeah. So not a lot of thought went into that process, but people were doing what felt right, and they felt like, hey, we need to do something, and that
Pushback was required.
right. Right, but that need to do something often leads to negative outcomes.
Knee jerks have never
Yeah.
been good.
Yeah. So, and in the wake of that, and I have to say this. I have to thank VCDL. They were outstanding in their representation of. I'm going to change the dialogue here because I'm tired of using the dialogue and the narrative.
Who are the VCDL, by the way?
It's a group that represents gun owners and the interests of gun owners in the preservation of the right to keep and bear arms. But they focus mainly on individual rights.
Right.
And they've done a great job lobbying in Richmond on behalf of the rights of maintaining ownership of firearms for individuals. And they continue to do so. And
that's also the easy battle to win.
Well, if we look at some of the decisions that the Supreme Court has had in the past couple of decades, that is correct. The Supreme Court has come down solidly on the individual ownership part of the Second Amendment. And in the Heller decision and subsequent decisions, they basically affirmed that individuals have the right to keep and bear arms. And by arms, their definition of arms is anything that can be used offensively or defensively. So there's a whole separate rabbit hole that we could go down, but there's talk about banning things such as body armor, which is strictly a defensive type of arm by the definition given to us by the Supreme Court. And the legislatures seem oblivious to that document. They seem to ignore what the Supreme Court has said in the past directly relating to that topic.
That would appear all too common. But anyway.
It seems of late, that seems to be happening more and more. So let's fast forward a little bit. And we got to a point where virtually all of the counties of Virginia, I think there was a handful that did not, but virtually all of the counties passed a resolution declaring themselves what was the phrase? Sanctuary county. Thank you very much, Jeremiah.
But isn't that very much in keeping with the narrative and the verbiage that is being put out by the very people that we oppose?
So there's a couple of problems with this. The sanctuary county movement actually had no force of law. These were resolutions, and Virginia is not a home state, a home rule state. And what that means is the counties and local municipalities must adhere to Virginia state statute. They can't do anything that is contrary to Virginia state statute. That would be home rule if they did. And instead, we have something called Dillon rule, which is directly hinders the ability of counties and local municipalities to counter the state statutes. But most people didn't know that, and they didn't understand that. And a lot of people feel like, well, my county passed this resolution. Here in Franklin County, they did pass a resolution. Yeah. And they say, okay, well, I'm protected. I'm safe. But nothing could be further from the truth.
No, that appears to be more of a... That's a smoke screen that was laid, because you've got a very similar analogy with the federal laws and state laws.
Right.
So,
right.
Okay, we're moving on.
So fast forward a little bit more, and people started talking online about mobilizing and reinvigorating the militia of the several states. And this is a concept that the Founding Fathers spoke extensively of in the constitutional conventions. They wrote extensively about, and it actually was the basis for the largest disagreement among the Founding Fathers. Everyone likes to talk about the 3/5 Compromise as being the Great Compromise, and that was the linchpin as to whether or not all 13 colonies would sign on to this document, the Constitution. But the reality was the biggest disagreement was directly relating to militias, and specifically the right to keep and bear arms of individuals, control of the militia, and all of the subsequent struggles of power, whether it's centralized to a strong federal government or whether it's kept in a republican form of government, which is the states and the people themselves lend their power to a central government. And the viewpoint of the anti-federalists was that this power should be maintained as locally as possible. And that meant at a county or town level. And the history of the militia up until that point was very much local. We can get into that in a little bit. I don't want to go down that road just yet.
So this really, we're talking about the argument that, as a constitutional scholar should know about, is the Federalist Papers.
Right. So in school they teach the Federalist Papers, but they never teach the Anti-Federalist Papers. Billy, have you ever had the opportunity in school did someone come to you and say, "Hey, read the Anti-Federalist Papers"?
I'm gonna be honest with you. If they did, I wouldn't have any recollection. There's been a lot of booze and a lot of hits to the head over the years. So if they did,
Loud
I don't
explosions.
Yes.
More likely than not, that didn't happen.
Yeah, I remember the Federalists for sure. The
yeah.
Anti-Federalist, it doesn't ring a bell.
And so really, the root of the problem today is this disagreement between those who believe in a strong central authority government and the anti-federalists who believe in a distribution of power that is maintained by the people. And several of the founders wrote specifically that the power remains with the people, that the power is vested in the people. And during this argument, James Madison himself, who's considered the preeminent Federalist, reassured the Anti-Federalists that, hey, power ultimately rests with the people. And he was speaking directly about the militia. So a whole bunch of folks around the state had militia musters. They advertised. They watched some people on YouTube and said, "Hey, let's all just get together and form a militia." But the difficulty is in living memory, this hasn't been done. And in the 100 plus years since we've had a functional constitutional militia in this country, there have been reams of statutes that have been passed, both on the state and federal level, that hem in and restrict the capacity of each individual citizen to exercise their Second Amendment rights in their fullest. Most people know the Second Amendment. They talk about their unalienable right to keep.
Well, most people know the wordage.
Right.
They don't really know what it necessarily means.
Right.
And you'll see that on social media all the time. They'll say, "Oh, militia." Well, they don't understand in the context of militia and the Second Amendment. It just means your rifle being well kept. You know what I mean? It's about keeping yourself.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state.
Yes.
The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Necessary to the security of the free state. There's several clauses there that are very important. First off, well-regulated, as you very well pointed out, in the time period of the Founding Fathers, simply meant well drilled, well disciplined, well trained, properly functioning. It didn't mean a whole bunch of rules and regulations that were applied to this group of people by a central authority.
Well, by those standards, our very own military doesn't even adhere to those these days for the most part.
Yeah, and that, believe it or not,
Touché.
that was actually a major concern of the Founding Fathers when they were discussing this militia issue. The argument of whether or not our national republic should rely on a standing army or the militias of the several states, and this tug of war between the Federalists and Anti-Federalists revolved around this core critical issue. The arguments of the Federalists were that the militias could not be properly disciplined over the long haul because the militia is supposed to be the yeomanry, the average citizen, the shopkeeper, the lawyer, the factory worker, the farmer, the blacksmith, the preacher. And in fact, if you look at the folks who showed up on April 19th, 1775 on Lexington Green, they represented every profession that existed at the time in the colonies, perhaps except politician.
That was a tangent, Brian.
Yeah,
We'll leave it alone.
Sorry. Thank you. No, I lost my train of thought. Get me back on track, Simon.
Well,
you said on April 19th.
Well, you were talking about how the militias would not be regulated and they would die off.
Oh, right. So the big concern, the argument of the Federalists to have a standing army and to not rely on the militias of the several states was Alexander Hamilton himself said in Federalist 29. He argued that it would be impossible to keep the militia well regulated. And as a result, in time, a select militia would arise. And Elbridge Gerry and several of the anti-federalists, George Mason and others, spoke out against that belief. And they said, if a select militia arises, it would be controlled by the federal government. And the power of the people that's supposed to be vested with the people would be co-opted, and our Republican form of government would be imperiled. The founders believed that the militia was the bulwark, the last line of defense against tyranny. And they defined tyranny specifically as something impressed upon the people by the state. And by state, it was capital S, by the central authority. And so the anti-federalists very much were against this idea of the development of a select militia. And so a whole bunch of things happened. They argued about this for quite a while. There were several amendments that were proposed, and they finally arrived at the conclusion of, hey, we're going to pass the Constitution. The anti-federalists agreed to it because there's going to be a Bill of Rights. And in that Bill of Rights that's passed by the first Congress, we will include an amendment that specifies that the right of the people to keep and bear arms is necessary for the security of a free state. So that we'll get to that in a second.
Yeah.
Lost my train of thought again.
That's my fault again.
Sorry.
Did I just throw a googly in there?
So let's deal with the small s. So everybody, a lot of folks think, well, the militia was intended to be controlled completely by the state, and nothing could be further from the truth. A little bit of tidbit, a little bit of a bone was thrown to us by Justice Scalia during the Supreme Court decision and the Heller decision. It may have been in the McDonald decision. It was one of the two. Both of them were revolved around the same issue of the right to keep and bear arms. But it was written in the majority opinion that the right to keep and bear arms was not limited to the people in states. It certainly isn't limited to the states. The whole argument was, do the people themselves have the right to keep and bear arms? And the Supreme Court determined, yes, they do. But it's also not strictly limited to states. The term polity was used, and that's something that's never discussed, but it's very important. And the reason is a polity can be defined as any kind of organization or social structure where people have gathered together for common purposes. That could include a corporation, that could include a county, a municipality. And so the idea that—
It's a very broad brush.
Right. It significantly expands the window of the definition of where people can exercise their right to keep and bear arms. And specifically, I believe it was included there for a reason. I believe that he knew where this argument would ultimately lead to. And it would lead to whether or not the militias of the several states, which were intended to be the guardians of the republic, have a constitutional role in our modern society. And our argument, the reason we founded our company, our not-for-profit, non-stock corporation, is that we believe the text, history, and tradition, which are the measures that the current Supreme Court is using to analyze our rights, the text, history, and tradition support not only that the militia is we the people, that the militia pre-exists the Constitution and therefore was included in the development of the affirmed rights that followed, but that the people have the right to keep and bear arms fitting for militia service. What does that mean? Well, if we go back and look at the Militia Acts of 1792 and all of the discussions during the constitutional conventions, particularly in Virginia, we can see the discussion revolved around the people having the right, in fact, the duty to keep arms suitable for military service in their homes. They had a responsibility and a duty not only to keep those arms and ammunition, but to train with them. And so if we go back to the Second Amendment and we look at the core analysis, it says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. What that means is we as citizens have an obligation, a duty to train in order to have the right to keep and bear arms for the purpose of militia service. And the militia service is necessary to the security of a free state. Back to the whole capital S, small s, state could mean polity, your local community, your county, right?
Exactly. It trims it down to that narrative.
Right.
Well, so for me, and wow, that's extremely
That's a scholarly.
thorough.
That's a scholarly
very much so.
definition.
I don't know if our audience is quite prepared. We've had a couple on here with that kind of brain power, but we got to build them up to it right there because, and maybe I'm projecting a little bit on my audience, and maybe they're a little bit smarter than me. I something you all touched on a little bit earlier, and is something I kind of want to talk about a little bit because I think it kind of brings in the cultural aspect of this all. But you were talking about a few years ago in 2018, and we had a knee-jerk reaction, and then a knee-jerk reaction to a knee-jerk reaction. Now, as far as all of that is concerned, I know you had mentioned that there's no real nothing legal that really backs that the resolutions that the county has made, but at the end of the day, I'm not necessarily sure that really had a lot of impact on the thought process. And by that, I mean, when everybody's showing up and everybody demanding this by their board of supervisors, by their counties, whether it mattered or not legally, I think the message had been sent. And that message was all compiled after all of those counties. And all of a sudden the governor looks at it come across his desk. He's like, well, it has no legal, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if it's legal or where they have it. What you're seeing there in real time is your constituents all collectively around the state saying, F you, this is going to be a battle if you want to go through with this. And for whatever reason, it completely blew my mind. Northam backed off of it.
So it wasn't actually Governor Northam that backed off. What happened was there were 3 senators in the Senate who decided, they were Democrat senators, who decided to vote against the assault weapons, the so-called assault weapons ban.
They tabled the resolution for a year.
That's correct.
Tabling is a coward's way out. But I'm the guy to say that.
And as far as I know, I haven't kept track with everyone involved, but I do know 2 of the 3 are no longer there. So a lot of people think, a lot of people think that all of those resolutions had a direct political effect in stopping what happened, and they may have, but I believe the reality is we had 3 Democrat senators who I would classify as old school blue dog Democrats who believed in individual rights, and they weren't going to have any of this confiscatory.
They had their hand on the same Bible, making the same oath when they got in office that they will uphold the Constitution. And the bare facts of it are, as a citizen and resident of this county, it is our duty to defend ourselves.
Well, it's our duty to be well regulated.
To be well regulated.
And to be prepared for
Yes.
service in the militia. And so that gets us to part two of what happened here. A lot of folks don't really understand the way our government is structured. When the Constitution was passed, the original document came first, and the Bill of Rights came second. The Constitution itself specifically spelled out who would regulate and provide for the militia of the several states. And the words in those sections of the Constitution are very important. When it says provide for, it presupposes the existence of a militia. You can't provide for something that doesn't exist. So in the very document, the Constitution and the federal government was recognizing that the militias existed. And then they gave the authority to appoint officers and to train the militias to the states themselves. In the Commonwealth of Virginia, we have a militia clause in our own Constitution, and we also have statutes, many state statutes that revolve around the definitions of a militia and when militia can be used. A lot of folks don't know this, but there are categories of militia. A lot of folks think that the National Guard is the militia. It's merely a component of militia.
One of.
That's correct. It's part of the organized militia. And
let's not forget that. Let's not forget that the Virginia National Guard is the state Commonwealth militia
part of.
Right.
For the area that we live in.
Well, somebody should have clued in George Bush and Dick Cheney on that, because they had every National Guard unit from here to Alaska and Hawaii overseas probably at least once in the past.
Well,
that goes back to something that is later on in our
dare I say the 1903 Dick Act.
Actually, 1903, 1916, and 1933 were all very important dates in how the federal government changed the militia of the several states, and they took control of that militia, which was supposed to be in the control of the states, and usurped that control.
Yeah.
And so they created what the founders most feared:
a federal militia,
a select militia that is under the direct control of the federal government. And
that's not what it should be.
That's absolutely not what the founders intended.
Now, a select militia, can you define that for everybody?
Sure.
Like how would you categorize that compared to what we got going on today? So, to put it into that context.
Sure.
For me, as a simpleton.
So let me go back directly to the words. Richard Henry Lee, an anti-federalist and senator from Virginia, when Congress adopted the Bill of Rights, wrote, "A militia are in fact the people themselves and render regular troops in a great measure unnecessary." That means a standing army isn't necessary. The Constitution ought to secure a genuine militia and guard against a select militia by providing that the militia shall include all men capable of bearing arms, and that all regulations tending to render this general militia useless and defenseless by establishing select corps of militia be avoided. To preserve liberty, it is essential that the body of the people always possess arms. He wasn't the only one. There were several other. Thomas Jefferson spoke out against select militia. And so what a select militia is the militia is trained and controlled by the central federal government. The militia itself was supposed to be the balance against a strong federal authority. And it was supposed to be, the control of that militia was supposed to be vested with the states, but primarily with the people. The people themselves were supposed to regulate themselves, discipline themselves, provide arms suitable for militia service so that they could defend the security of a free state. And when the nation was born, that's kind of how it was. And it over time has evolved into this idea that the founders warned against of a select militia.
The carrot and the stick, unfortunately, is winning.
What we're trying to do is we're trying to reestablish militia service, volunteer service in a constitutional militia. We're trying to reestablish that right as a right in practice. And we believe if we provide evidence that we are well regulated, we will then have standing in any future litigation if and when a state or federal legislature decides that they're going to ban an entire category of firearms. We believe that if we don't stand up and offer evidence that we are practicing this right of volunteer militia service, we will not have standing, so we will not have the ability to take a case to the Supreme Court and argue our collective right of volunteer militia service, which guarantees our individual right to own arms suitable for that militia service. It's an approach that hasn't been made in any of the other states that have banned entire categories of firearms.
That's in living memory. Actually, it goes back even further than that, right? Because we're looking to re-establish that right.
So essentially, what happened was in the mid 1800s, people started being concerned that militias weren't training, they weren't regulated. The federal government kept insisting we need to grow a standing army. William Story actually wrote about his concern that if the people did not take up this right and reinvigorate the militia of the several states, that this right would perish, and in doing so, the republic would follow. And along came the Civil War, and in the wake of the Civil War, the federal government sought to exert more control and more authority over the states. And many of the states, having gone through the hell that was that war, at that time didn't feel like it was appropriate to push back. People were beaten down. People were
tired of war.
Right.
And I don't think people can understand just how demented and twisted Sherman was in his march to the sea. I mean, what he did in his path and his wake was as disastrous and as sickening as anybody has done in probably any time period.
So
the intent of that was to punish the people.
Exactly.
It wasn't a military strategy.
It was massacre after massacre.
It was a war crime.
So 600,000 Americans lost their lives during the Civil War. And if you take the current percentage and apply that today, that would be 3.5 million Americans dead in the course of 4 years.
This is Jeremiah speaking. He is our senior vice president of Franklin County Militia Incorporated. So I appreciate the input.
That's a big hat.
So let's fast forward a little bit past the Civil War, and we come to the Spanish-American War. Right after the Civil War, the National Rifle Association was founded, and it was founded by a bunch of generals and politicians who saw that the marksmanship skills of the citizens were abysmal, and they looked towards bringing back the idea of the well-regulated citizenry. So they advanced that by creating the National Rifle Association, which, when it was first chartered, actually was supposed to sponsor rifle clubs and sponsor marksmanship among the citizenry. The Spanish-American War came along, and there were volunteer militia units that served under Teddy Roosevelt, and in fact served well. But the federal government wanted to secure control over the militia. And in 1903, something called the Dick Act was passed, and that essentially federalized the National Guard. And in the subsequent 1916 National Defense Act, control of the National Guard was absolutely set in stone by the federal government.
It was ceded from state to federal.
Yeah. And state statutes then had to change in order to reflect Again, we're going back to that whole, there's a Dillon rule and there's home rule.
Yeah.
Well, the states have to, the supremacy of the federal government is assured, and the states are really supposed to obey as long as what they're being told to do is constitutional. And if we go back to the founders' idea, it was when something was unconstitutional, when tyranny is being imposed on the people, the militias of the several states were supposed to be that bulwark against that type of tyranny. But by that point, that idea had been forgotten. It had been lost.
But you've touched on a narrative that I'm now hearing as a retort to being trained for militia service. And you mentioned it with the formation of the NRA being a gun club.
Mm-hmm.
I just like people to remember the narrative that we've confronted in the past with certain members of the community about referring to us as a gun club. Yeah. That may be the source of their narrative and where that's going.
Let me be absolutely clear about this. Franklin County Militia Incorporated is not a gun club. We are all statutorily defined members of the unorganized militia in the Commonwealth of Virginia. That's not our definition. We're not declaring ourselves to be militia. We are statutorily defined. The federal government, under U.S. Code 10, statutorily defines the unorganized militia in all states. We are members of that class of unorganized militia. This is not us declaring that we are a militia. We are a part of the militia. As such, we have an obligation to be well regulated. And
a duty.
A duty, that's correct. And so our argument is we cannot practice our Second Amendment right fully because there have been statutes passed, federal code passed, that take away the ability or so hem in and constrict the ability of individual citizens to volunteer for service in the unorganized militia, that the right no longer is practicable. So what we want to do is change that. We exist as a training organization so that we can provide evidence that the citizenry is well regulated. We also exist to advocate for constitutional rights, for the preservation of the republic, for the restoration of the republic of our founders. We are not an organization focused on hate. We do not discriminate based on any category except for one. One category where we do discriminate is if you come in to our organization and say, hey, I'd like to participate. I'd like to be a volunteer. Please train me. We have a question. Do you believe in the values of the founders of this republic? Do you believe that our rights come from the Creator, as the founders said in the Declaration of Independence? Or do you believe that those rights come from the government? Do you believe in something other than a Republican form of government? And if the answer is, well, hey, I believe in one world Marxism or socialism or globalism, and I'm ready for the great struggle, we're not going to welcome you into our organization.
And that was, I think, my comment a couple of weeks ago, where the argument of inclusivity was, and that's very much part of the narrative of the progressive Marxist left, radical left. And I vehemently disagree with that.
Well, one thing that they believe in is they believe in the collective right outweighs the individual right. And one thing that is essential to America is that we are individuals and we have individual rights.
Well, this is collectivism.
Yeah.
And this is where that BLM narrative comes from, which is a Marxist doctrine, as we all know. But this is the argument that we have to counter.
So let's not go down that.
So
that
let's not
rabbit
go
hole.
there.
Instead, let's profess some positives. Jeremiah, it was good of you to point that out, that everything is based on individual rights, and I would add individual responsibilities.
Very much so.
And so let's look at the post-Civil War period, in particularly in Virginia. Immediately following the Civil War, there was a rise of black militias across Virginia as well as across the country. It's been reported that more Spencer carbines were sold in the few years following the Civil War than the entire decade prior to the Civil War. Those arms were being sold to black militias. And so I'm going to say those people were exercising their God-given individual rights.
Absolutely, they were.
They were protecting their polity. They were exercising their rights. They were protecting their communities. There were more black legislators elected to the state legislatures, in that time period following the Civil War, because people were exercising their God-given rights that were now constitutionally affirmed. Our organization supports all of those rights. We do not stand against any exercise of God-given individual rights that are affirmed by the Constitution.
That dismisses so many arguments that we are currently receiving in regards to inclusivity for your individual rights, whether you choose to be a member of the Franklin County Militia or not, is regardless. Those are your God-given rights.
And
done deal.
And one thing that people don't realize about individual rights is that you do not have a right to infringe on someone else's right.
Exactly.
And therefore your right cannot be taken away from another. You could not. You have to give up your rights.
So we hear all the time in the press, especially in this administration, we've heard this phrase repeated often: there are no absolute rights. And I would argue that a right that can be taken away is not a right at all. The government did not give us these rights. The Creator gave us these rights.
Amen.
That is the foundation of our republic. Those are the words that are in the Declaration of Independence. And if folks do not believe in those tenets, they do not believe in the Republican form of government. We have a constitutional republic. Words matter. And so since the 1903 Dick Act and the subsequent 1916 National Defense Act, which really wrapped up the National Guard in federal control, there was another act in 1933. If you notice, that time frame happens to coincide with the birth of progressivism in this country. And it was during that time that progressives sought to centralize power and authority in the federal government and to grow the bureaucracy to achieve the ends that they sought. In 1916, part of that act actually, Congress passed this in 1916, actually took away the ability of state militias to keep and bear arms. They only authorized the National Guard to keep and bear arms. And nobody stood up and said anything to the contrary, and it passed.
They were tired of war.
We had just that's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
Having just gone through 1914, 1918, World War One.
So from 1916,
Smack dab in the middle of it.
Well, 1916, the America was leading up to World War One.
The Brits were in it at 1914. I'm just saying that now.
he's got a different perspective. Yeah. So yeah.
Sorry.
So this law remained in effect until the late 1940s when, I can't remember the congressman's name, and I should because he's a hero to the Republic. A congressman from somewhere out in the Midwest was going through old National Defense Authorization Acts, and he's leafing through, and he sees this line, and it says, state militias are no longer allowed to arm themselves. And he said, that's absolutely unconstitutional. It shouldn't exist. And so he sponsored a bill and got it passed that statutorily reestablished the right of state militias to keep and bear arms. So that brought us up to 1947. And since then, not much has really happened in terms of statutes or discussions about what the status of the entirety of the militia is. And so we were talking about this earlier and kind of got sidetracked, but the militia is comprised of the organized militia, and that's the National Guard, and also the state guard, and in Virginia, it's the Virginia Defense Force, and then the unorganized militia. And the federal government today treats the unorganized militia like a pool of cannon fodder for any future conflicts. They look at them, everybody's obligated to register for selective service. And if we ever need to reinstitute the draft, well, the unorganized militia is the pool of candidates that we will draw from. I would argue the government has that authority. It is in the Constitution, but we as citizens also have the right to prepare for service. And we have an obligation and a duty to train, to prepare for any instance when the federal or state government might activate us. And if that's not done, it's infringing on our rights. It's infringing on our right to life, to happiness.
The pursuit
right.
of happiness.
Right. And so we have a right to train to defend ourselves and our families should the need ever arise. The founders knew that, and that was also a component of the militias of the several states. So the way it went in 1903 and 1916 is the federal government turned around and said to the state legislatures, okay, well, you have the authority to appoint officers, and you have the responsibility to train your militias. And then the state legislature in Virginia gave that authority to the governor. And the state legislature then also gave that authority to the adjutant general. But in 1933, the pool of people who are capable of serving as the adjutant general was more limited and more controlled, such that it's military officers who are loyal and controlled by essentially the federal government. So the idea that the state, the Commonwealth of Virginia, has its own military, which the founders intended, has been usurped because control of that military is now essentially a function of the federal government. Now, Virginia still is allowed, that has not been removed, statutorily removed, and if it were, it would be unconstitutional, but they're allowed to keep a state defense force. And of course, everybody in the unorganized militia is allowed to, and I would argue has the duty and responsibility to be well regulated and to train. And so that responsibility of regulating the militias is the responsibility of the governor and the adjutant general. And if you read the Commonwealth of Virginia statutes, it says specifically that they are supposed to establish the standards, but they have not. Why is that? I would argue, if we go back to the founding fathers and the quote that I read earlier, that it's intentional, that the government does not want the people participating.
Well, it's now under federal control, so why would they hand that control back?
Partially, that's correct, but they simply don't want the people, the power to be vested in the people. It's better if the select militia directly answers to the central authority of the federal government. And the whole idea, the whole concept of republicanism and states' rights withers on the vine because the militias of the several states have been neglected and abandoned. So, for example, I want to exercise my Second Amendment right. I want to train to volunteer, to be prepared to volunteer for the militia should the governor ever call upon me. Okay, where are the standards of discipline and training?
So now we have to adopt.
Where are they?
There are none.
There are none.
There are none. There have been none issued for the unorganized militia. They exist for the Virginia Defense Force. They exist for the National Guard.
Can you not adopt
So let me. So when you're saying unorganized militia, you're just essentially
man in the street?
You're talking about
It's
anybody that's in the selective service that has signed up. That's it.
it's
No, the unorganized militia, according to Virginia state statute, is any person
correct.
between the age of 16 and 54.
4, correct.
Okay, so basically what that's saying is anybody in those ages, no matter who you are, what you do, needs to be proficient and needs to be in shape and needs to be prepared at all times to be called up. Because if that's the case, I can tell you right now, all you got to do is stroll around a Walmart and you can tell that's not the case.
That's correct.
In any state, in any county, in any town in this country, let alone the state.
The people have abandoned
So
republicanism.
And
The
that's
ideas of our
exactly what I
founding.
was going to say. The people have abandoned, even though it is their duty.
Mhm.
And I'm a big thing about duty.
And I would also say the people have failed, not the system.
Absolutely.
Correct. That's
Well, through coercion. Now, coercion,
Well-
when it comes to funding and how the federal government has taken over the state National Guard.
Well, we're fat and we're happy and everything
Well,
is
no, that's-
convenient.
that- no,
and we have
that's not
breads
how
and
that
circuses
works.
everywhere. Well, I'm saying
Right.
that's why people get out of shape. That's why people get empathetic.
Yeah, but what I'm saying there is that the federal funding of the National Guard is inappropriate. It should be state funded, state controlled, and it should not be controlled by the federal
Well, no.
pocketbook.
And you know, when I signed up, I'd never considered any of this stuff. I signed up for the National Guard. I said, you know,
Right.
you know-
You went to war for the National Guard.
yes, one of the first ones over there as a national, which made no sense at all. And you know, when I think back on it, as soon as I got a little bit older and I had time to really, I guess, debrief my own thoughts, I was sitting there thinking, when you do that, now you're leaving your states vulnerable. So now what happens?
That's correct.
What happens now that I'm in Iraq with 140 or 50 other guys that do transport and something happens here? And we all saw that during Katrina, because after Katrina, my unit that had just recently gotten back from Iraq, many of us were trying to send us down to Katrina, and I got out of it, but it's because a lot of the Louisiana National Guard was overseas at the time in Afghanistan and Iraq. So, you know, people don't think about that kind of stuff. National Guard isn't there to be a bench spot for the Army. It's supposed to be there as a last ditch effort for the Army. But in the meantime, stay here, handle natural disasters, handle riots, handle.
Now, here's the kick in the teeth. There was a really vicious storm that put loads of people at risk on I-95 2 years ago. And it was a bit more than 2 years ago because Northern was in control. And Northern had the ability and the power to get the National Guard out onto that crisis situation for potentially residents or people traveling through Virginia.
Are we talking about the tank that was commandeered?
No, not the no,
Okay.
no.
I-95 was shut down by a
I-95 was
snowstorm.
shut down. It was a crisis situation, and Northern did not let the National Guard deal with that. And that was exactly what they should have been used for, but it wasn't called upon by the state. And the fact that it wasn't called upon by the state is one issue. The fact that it was controlled really by federal government is another issue. And they're both in conflict with each other. And that situation to me was it was a bombshell, because the National Guard should have been activated to get those people off of I-95 in a life-threatening situation. And that's what the National Guard is there for. And number one, the governor didn't do anything about it. and neither did the feds. And the feds were controlling the strings, and the governor should have swung around and overrode that whole situation. But that's a bit of a nightmare.
Code of Virginia, Title 44, Chapter 1, 44-75.1. The governor or his designee may call forth the militia or any part thereof to state active duty for service in any of the following circumstances. In the event of evasion, invasion, or insurrection, or imminent threat of either, when the combination of persons becomes so powerful as to obstruct the execution of laws in any part of the Commonwealth, when the governor determines that a state agency or agencies having law enforcement responsibilities are in need of assistance, in the event of flood, hurricane, fire, or other forms of natural or man-made disaster, wherein human life, public or private property, or the environment is imperiled, in emergencies of lesser magnitude than those described in subdivision 4, that was the sentence I just read, including but not limited to the disruption of vital public services, wherein the use of militia personnel or equipment would be of assistance to one or more departments, agencies, institutions, or political subdivisions of the Commonwealth. I will add to this, your local elected Board of Supervisors can request assistance from any part of the militia, including the unorganized militia. The sheriff of your county can request of the governor assistance of any part of the militia in response to any of the things that I just read.
And what's the punishment if they fail to respond?
So here we go. We're gonna. I'm glad you brought that up. In Virginia, there's another statute, 18.2-463. If any person, on being required by any sheriff or other officer, refuse or neglect to assist him in the execution of his office in a criminal case, in the preservation of the peace, in apprehending or securing any person for breach of the peace, or in any case of escape or rescue operations, he shall be guilty of a Class 2 misdemeanor. So we, the members of the unorganized militia, have a duty, a responsibility to be well regulated and prepared to be in service to the state. And in fact, there are state statutes that will that we can be charged under with a misdemeanor if we do not respond to that call for assistance. And yet, we have no structured training. We are completely...
No affirmation.
No affirmation of the right that we have under the Second Amendment to volunteer for service in the militia.
By the way, which county militia responded to the forest tornado?
So here's a perfect example of a properly functioning unorganized militia. On May 27th, 2022, there was an EF2 tornado that touched down in Bedford County, Virginia. No lives were lost, but the property damage was significant. Power crews and emergency responders did what they could to help restore the area. On May 28th, a few Red Cross volunteers were canvassing the area. A few of God's Pit Crew personnel were there. This was Memorial Day weekend, after all. Bedford County Militia organized a relief effort and asked neighboring county militias to assist them. They did that because the sheriff of Bedford County asked the Bedford County Militia, hey, could you help us in response to this natural disaster? Our emergency services are overwhelmed. We do not have enough personnel to deal with this in a timely manner. People's private property has been imperiled. Can you assist us? And so the Bedford County Militia sent the word out to all of the other unorganized militias who are training to be well regulated. They're citizens who are prepared to volunteer in just such circumstances. And over the course of 2 days, volunteers helped property owners recover from the natural disaster. Volunteers from several other county militias arrived on May 29th with heavy equipment, skid steers, excavators. And by far, the largest contingent of volunteers was from the unorganized militias of the several counties. Nowhere did I see the critics of the militia lined up to help. I'm proud of the response efforts of the Franklin County volunteers. They gave their time and energy to help their neighbors in need. And indeed, after the fact, Bedford County Sheriff Michael Miller wrote a letter Dear Franklin County Militia, I'd like to extend our sincere appreciation for your assistance during the aftermath of the tornado cleanup in Bedford County on May 27, 2022. Without hesitation, members of your group responded with manpower, chainsaws, heavy machinery, and other much-needed equipment to help members of the community with cleanup efforts. Your members embody the meaning of the well-known phrase, many hands make light work. Your assistance helped us and the community more than you know. And it was a great feeling to see and experience neighboring community members helping these folks out in their time of need. In fact, one local resident commented on how grateful she felt when she saw volunteers with chainsaws working their way down her road to remove trees crossing the only entrance to her farm. Thank you again for your unselfish assistance to your neighbors in need. We're very fortunate to live and serve in a caring community surrounded by caring neighbors like you. Signed, Sheriff Mike Miller.
And Franklin County Militia were a major part in that.
Well, I think
action.
this is a major. This is a major point to be made right here, because the perception, I'm not sure y'all got it many a times, but the perception out there, especially, amongst social media and all these social justice warriors and all these political activists and everything out there that want to degrade the idea. Well, their whole thing is, a militia is just a bunch of yeehaws and hillbillies and rednecks hopping around in their military gear wanting to overthrow the government. They have no earthly idea what they're talking about. They're finding these fringe groups out here, and many of these fringe groups, might I add, like the Patriot Front and some of these other ones, are probably, as somebody who served the military, I can sit there and tell you, watching them march up and down the streets, they are chock full of feds. Those probably 60 or 70% of some of these groups out here that you see on TV, the ones that are most portrayed in the media, are probably 70 to 80% feds, and the 20% in there are FUDs. And what I mean, they're the dumbest people that you can find, because they're going to follow along and they're going to sell it. But that's they're trying to make it seem as if a militia is just a bunch of yeehaws out here carrying around their weapons, wanting to fight the government. This is the direct opposite. This is you all working hand in hand with the local government to be able to assist in a situation. And sheriff, who I consider the local government, the sheriff. I consider him local because he's elected. Because the government could not handle it. So so this is a fine example to kind of dispel some of the stereotypes and some of the rumors.
So we're very much fighting this struggle is how militias are portrayed in the mass media. And in the time period of the 1990s and 2000s, there were a lot of groups who claimed to be militias. A lot of people have the misunderstanding that if I just gather a group together and I use threat of force to achieve my political will, that's my constitutional right.
No, you're a terrorist when you do that.
That's actually the definition of terrorism. Yeah,
that's terrorism.
So what we need to make clear to people, we are a constitutional militia. We are not anti-government. We love the republic of our founders. We love the rights that are affirmed by the Constitution and given to us by the Creator. And we want to preserve that system of government. So there's a lot of groups who think that they can use militia in such a way that they go out and, for example, counter-protest a group. A group, whether or not we politically agree with what it is that they're trying to achieve, a group that has a right to exercise their First Amendment right to protest, as long as that protest does not destroy private property. When private property or public property becomes imperiled, it is the responsibility of our government to respond to that. The militias should have no function in responding to that. We should not be setting up to counter-protest Antifa. That's the responsibility of the local sheriff, local law enforcement. What the duty and responsibility of the unorganized militia is to provide a force, a reservoir of people to assist the local and state authorities should they call upon us, which they are statutorily allowed to do in those examples that I listed earlier. Among those examples are in case of riot, in case of civil disturbances, in addition to natural disasters. And so a lot of people say, well, if the governor himself isn't the one that orders out the militia, nobody else can do it. There actually is a statute in the Code of Virginia. It's 18.2-411. It says, when any number of persons, whether armed or not, are unlawfully or riotously assembled, the sheriff of the county and his deputies, the police officials of the county, city, or town, and any assigned militia, or any of them, shall go among the persons assembled, or as near to them as safety will permit, and command them in the name of the Commonwealth immediately to disperse. If upon such command the persons unlawfully assembled do not disperse immediately, such sheriff, officer, or militia may use such force as is reasonably necessary to disperse them and to arrest those who fail to refuse to disperse. To accomplish this end, the sheriff or other law enforcement officer may request and use the assistance and services of private citizens. Every endeavor shall be used both by such sheriff and other officers and by the officer commanding any other force which can be made consistently with the preservation of life to induce or force those unlawfully assembled to disperse before an attack is made upon those unlawfully assembled by which their lives may be endangered. That's in the Code of Virginia. So the local sheriff has the authority to request assistance from the citizenry as private citizens or as unorganized militia.
And this can even be as simple as you always see in the movies, you know, while a cop will sit there and commandeer a vehicle and tell somebody to stop, I'm commandeering your vehicle. You don't really see that, but that's kind of one of those.
But it doesn't require the sheriff to
get permission.
To get permission or deputize everyone. He can say, here's the responsibility I'm looking for you to engage in, whether it's defense of a property or a cleanup operation, whatever it may be.
Right.
But you're answering to a duly elected official.
Exactly.
Right. So that's the civil authority. And so in the statute of Virginia, which restricts militia and defines what the militia is, in our Constitution, the Constitution of Virginia, at the end of the clause, it says, and answers to a civil authority. Well, in this case, specifically, the sheriff would be the civil authority. Now, so keep in mind, if you pair that with the other Code of Virginia, which requires us to answer the call for assistance, and if we fail to answer that, we're guilty of a Category 2 misdemeanor. Right? So as citizens, we know we are required to assist if we're called upon to assist. And so therefore, I want to exercise my Second Amendment right. And I want to be well-regulated. I want to be well-trained, well-disciplined, so that, because it's necessary to the security of a free state, and state is not necessarily capital S, because the Supreme Court has defined state as any polity, which could be our county, which could be our community. And so if we follow that logic to its ultimate conclusion...
Here's the big deal. It is very non-inclusive. We are here to defend and help everyone within our community.
Not exclusive.
Right.
It's not exclusive.
Not
of
exclusive.
Anybody. That's correct. Yeah.
You would think a Brit could speak English.
You would have thought.
And so everybody's concerned about, well, how, who authorizes you to go out on the street and do whatever?
Very few.
It's codified.
Yes, it is.
There's very few circumstances in which the militia, the unorganized militia, can be activated and called up. And when they are, if the governor does it, we would then fall under the control and authority of the Virginia Defense Force, the control and authority directly of the governor, and the control and authority of the Adjutant General of the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Or the sheriff of the county.
And in the instance of a local activation, the sheriff utilizing this state statute in addition to something called the posse comitatus, which is a whole nother discussion, and it goes back to ancient English common law, back to Alfred the Great, as a matter of fact.
God bless him.
And so the sheriff has the ability to call upon the citizenry, and it's reaffirmed in this statute, to assist him to reestablish law and order. And so, again, I would argue those statutes exist. And because they exist, we have a duty and responsibility to be prepared, to volunteer, to serve in the capacity of militia. And in doing so, we would be exercising our Second Amendment rights completely. And so that brings us back to who we are, what we do. In our Articles of Incorporation, I'll read a little bit about it. Let's see. The corporation is organized exclusively for charitable purposes within the meaning of Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code or corresponding sections of any future federal tax code, such as for erecting, maintaining public buildings, monuments, or works, lessening the burdens of government, lessening neighborhood tensions, defending human. Okay, so this gets us back to the purpose for our not-for-profit, non-stock corporation. The corporation is organized for charitable purposes. We have applied for 501c3 status, and here's our statement in our Articles of Incorporation. It's exclusively for, hold on, I lost my place. Lessening the burdens of government, lessening neighborhood tensions, defending human and civil rights secured by law, combating community deterioration and juvenile delinquency, providing education to the community for charitable purposes in order to enhance individual and community security, promote civilian preparedness for, response to, and recovery from natural and man-made disasters, organize our communities, advocate for the preservation of rights, and foster the civil society and the social bonds between the people of the community in and around Franklin County, Virginia. The three primary subject areas in which the corporation shall provide education are in the safe, lawful, and effective use of firearms for personal defense and public safety, delivered primarily via lecture and practical training exercises in order to enhance the security of individuals and of the community. In the appropriate preparation for, response to, and recovery from natural and man-made disasters, delivered primarily by lecture and hands-on workshops in order to minimize the burden on our local government and emergency services, and in response in the community, and in the fundamentals and exercise of human and civil rights and duties belonging to all members of the community, delivered primarily via lecture, public discussion, and social events in order to foster the civil society of and the social bonds between the people and the community. And so we spell it out. That's what we stand for. That's why we exist. And we believe, essentially, the services we're providing are as a training organization. We are also advocates for the preservation of our natural rights and the restoration of the republic of our founders. We also serve as community organizers. And what we do is we help groups of like-minded people get together and exchange their skill sets and specialties so that they can help each other to become prepared for any number of those exigent circumstances. In doing all of those things, it helps us to be well-regulated, well-disciplined. But at the end of the day, there is a military component to this. The militia, we are all members, statutorily defined members of the militia. The militia is a military organization. We are not a paramilitary organization. We are simply exercising our Second Amendment rights. And so part of that argument that we have, in order for us to have standing, we have to show evidence that we are well regulated. And so we looked around, and the state has done nothing to show us, as the unorganized militia, What are the things that we need to do to be well regulated? And
by the way, the state is obligated.
They are. It is their
to
duty.
do that.
It is their
duty.
duty.
That is their duty. So they have failed.
Correct. And so what we've done is we've looked at a whole bunch of sources, and we said, well, what better way to train to be well regulated than using the sources that are approved for the National Guard and for the Virginia Defense Forces? So I'm going to hand this over now to Jeremiah, and he's going to talk a little bit about exactly how we're providing evidence that we are a well-regulated militia.
Well, before we jump into that real quick, I just wanted to talk a couple things real quick. I don't know if people could grasp, and maybe I misconstrued what you were saying earlier, but it seems like what you're doing here in Franklin County, what we're doing with the Franklin County Militia, is revolutionary. Like it's something. I mean, honestly, like something. What you're doing here, I don't think
can be appreciated. How many years? How many centuries?
It's not in living memory.
Not in living memory.
And I think that's very important because once again, dispelling all the narratives about the militia being a bunch of gun-toting yokels out here, just being, as you said, not a paramilitary force. Like there are rules and obligations. I mean,
there's a very strict code.
And I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know much about. I spent my time in the military. I have spoken with quite a few of the militia members around here, and I'm sincerely impressed. I'm impressed by how they carry themselves. I'm impressed about their knowledge. Like the stereotype and the perception is so far off. And what you all were doing here with setting the precedents is genius. You know what I mean? Like that right there, that is playing the long game. That is exactly what got us into this position in the first place, was Marxists and communists seething their slimy little ways into our federal government and into our schools and into our institutions for years and years and years and years. And what you all are doing here, you're not only doing everything by the book, you're not only doing what is constitutionally protected and constitutionally obligated, but you're also setting your cards up for that next battle. You're playing 4D chess right here.
So for the longest time, the conservative movement in this country has been reactionary, completely reactionary.
There we go. That is it right there. They have the frickin' Republicans and GOP in this country are nothing but progressives running the frickin' speed limit.
It's almost like they have been goaded into a certain set of reactions.
And the left has a long-term plan. They actually call it the Long March. And they work generationally to change, to alter the government in such a way that it results in the social outcomes that they want. Unfortunately, and this goes back to that original argument of Federalists versus anti-Federalists, that argument is still playing out today. We're still dealing with the ramifications of that argument today. And that's why the militia is a linchpin in that argument. The republic, a constitutional republic, the republic of our founders, cannot exist without a free and independent militia of the several states. And we have essentially abandoned that right to serve, to be well-regulated, and to practice in the militia because, well, the National Guard will do it. Well, the federal government will take care of it. And we've given up that right. And in doing so, we have lost oversight over that federal government.
I'm saying we have not given up that right.
Well, we haven't. That's right. Here in Franklin County and in several other counties in Virginia. And I want to thank you for your kind words.
Well, no, I mean, I honestly, for me, when I thought it was just coincidence, I started hanging around Simon more and I started hearing about it more, but you all are very young. Like you haven't been around. Like in my mind, for some reason, I thought this has been something that had been long standing. And the reason that I'd come to that assumption was because of all the professionalism that I've seen from people that have come up to me and spoke to me and said, hey, I do this, I do that. They've all been very intelligent. I've been able to carry on conversations with them that it's like, okay, you're not, just some random dude from Montana, like the media would like to make you out that you're some lone wolf gunman or some crazy nonsense. Like people are very dedicated and they're very dedicated to the cause and to the constitutional side. I mean, very intelligent people. Like, and I think that's what the biggest threat is. The threat has nothing to do with the fact that you all carry around weapons or the fact that you train, and we'll get to that here momentarily. It's the fact that you also have brains on top of all that, and that's the biggest threat, because there's tons of weapons out there. The government has millions of them. We have millions of them.
Right.
It's about being able to use your head, and that's the biggest threat.
Well, we're also we're combating a narrative that has really been contrived, and it's a malicious narrative that is anti-constitutional. And yeah, I really think that the crux of everybody's fear is that they've fallen into the narrative, and what we're doing is a counter narrative, and this is who we are. You know, I mean, this is our constitutional duty.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and we've mentioned it some before. We've had conversations about, some of the guests we've had, and, and we've joked about being on lists and things like that. But, at the end of the day, I'm almost 100% certain that we fall in some of those categories, and it's not because I'm just some, slack-jawed yokel running around here talking about it. It's because I have a thought process, and I'm able to put it together for people. I'm able to do it on this show right here, and people tune in and they listen and they take heed to that. That's the biggest threat. The threat isn't the idea. The threat is the person who can get that idea to the most people in the most reasonable amount of time, because the idea is always here, but you have to act on it. And, and we'll let you jump into it here. Because the training side of things is something I've been fascinated with, because without a lot of proper knowledge of everything going on, and with the limited knowledge I have had, I'm like, okay, well, simple things like marksmanship, that's good for worst case scenario. It's also good for your home. It's also good for hunting. It's also good for a plethora of other reasons. Also, life-saving measures. Something as simple as a tourniquet. I guarantee you all practice those things. Like, you don't even understand. A tourniquet is not necessary for war. It could be a car accident you come upon. You need to understand how to apply that tourniquet. I'm ignorant of this kind of stuff. CPR, life-saving measures. Things that not only can keep you alive on the battlefield, but as you stated, if you show up to a hurricane or a tornado where the government and the local, sheriff's office is overwhelmed, well, guess what? Now you have 50 guys or women, whatever the case may be, right here that can perform life-saving measures, who can, all team up, work together, and overtake whatever obstacle needs to be. I mean,
it is mandatory for the militia members, volunteers, to be TCCC qualified and educated.
That's the biggest threat.
So hold on a second. We're
going to go.
That's a good point that you're bringing that up, Simon. And really, it's a whole bundle of training that we have decided that we must meet in order to provide evidence that we are exercising our Second Amendment right fully. That we are well-regulated militia. And because we're well-regulated militia, we have the right to keep and bear arms suitable for service in the militia, in the military. And that brings it right back to how is it that you're well-regulated?
Jeremiah.
So this concept of being prepared is nothing new. It's what has been historically termed as the citizen soldier, which goes all the way back to Cincinnatus during Rome. It is the concept that the citizenry should be trained in a certain set of skills, so when needed, they can protect themselves, their country, and their family. It's the federal government has instituted this numerous times. As Brian mentioned earlier, the NRA was established as a marksmanship program because during the Civil War, marksmanship was horribly neglected. And then you come up into in 1916, the Reserve Officer Training Corps was established, so that those that went through military training who graduated college, when in the event of a war, they could be called up and then they could fit into the officer corps. You also have an example of the civilian marksmanship program, which was founded in 1903 by an act of Congress that, that issued the M 1903 to its members, which was the standard infantry rifle of its time. And, then the CMP also went later into issuing M1 Grands, which was the standard infantry issued rifle.
Beautiful rifle, by the way.
And, so this concept of the citizens being prepared, whatever called upon, is nothing new. It's just something that people they seem to think the status quo will continue. Oh, you'll never need it. Well, history shows us that
the opposite.
Yeah, history shows us there's time and time again we cannot, go for it. So, people ask me, oh, what are you training for? I said, we're not training. We're training to the fundamental. We're training on the basics because that's what the military does. Yes, they go into scenario planning and stuff based upon, but they also focus on the fundamentals and apply those fundamentals to certain circumstances. I did ROTC in college for 2.5 years, and the things that we do in the militia is nothing different than what I learned in ROTC, which is actually kind of nice because then I can actually use all that, use all that skill set that I developed. One of the things that we have instituted lately is we are doing the Alt-C qualification, which is the 25 meter rifle qualification that the Army uses, and it simulates silhouettes at various different distances, and it's a 40 round course of fire, and you can gauge off of that. As you mentioned, Simon, TCCC, which stands for Tactical Combat Casualty Care, which is required for all service members. It's also called ASM. That is something that was instituted after Fallujah when they realized the importance of, just simple things as tourniquet. And, it also can be applied to, shooting disasters, your car wrecks and other things. Just one thing that, having went through TCCC, I started doing my own family. We got a trauma bag now that I stage on the farm at various locations. And the reason I did that actually was because we had a car wreck in front of the house. And I realized I don't have a bag that I can just grab. And, because, I am the first responder. I mean, I got there in 30 seconds, and, there's no other first responder that can get there as quick as, a person on site.
Exactly.
And, thankfully, I had everything in there from tourniquets to, to Band-Aids.
Yep. I dragged a guy out of a burning car when he hit a tree at least 60 miles an hour.
Yeah, thankfully that time I didn't have to use it. But, it also, I had a
by the way, the dude was at least 50 pounds over my weight, and dragging him out was it was entertaining.
I got a friend that cut himself open with a chainsaw, and he had to use his leg open with a chainsaw, and he had to use his belt and a t-shirt. And so, what I carry in my pocket now when I'm using the chainsaw, I carry a tourniquet.
Yep. So now everyone who actually carries a concealed carry weapon should also carry a tourniquet, because it is your obligation to administer care, maybe to the guy that was wishing to cause you harm,
or yourself,
and you can self administer. But if you've been involved in that altercation, you are obligated to administer care.
Just imagine how much better off we would all be if most of the citizenry was walking around and had this basic skill.
One tourniquet.
Right. Emergency first aid, tourniquet application, and none of the other things that we instruct. Just those things alone would make a remarkable difference in the health and safety of the citizens of our county.
I mean, even in the Department of Defense, the training videos, one of the scenarios that they present is a mass casualty event, and it's amazing, 3 minutes is all it takes for a person to bleed out. And so, you have 3 minutes to apply a tourniquet. Well, if you don't have anything, you're just straight out of luck.
Yep.
So remember I said we're community organizers. Well, one of the way we go about instituting this type of training is we rely on people who have actually gone through the training or are certified as instructors or trainers themselves in these particular subject matters. So they're subject matter experts. We rely on veterans, and the veterans that we have in our organization understand they have an obligation to be well regulated, and they took an oath to defend this republic, and that oath is still relevant. And so without those folks, we couldn't do what we do. We couldn't provide evidence that we're still well regulated. We certainly wouldn't be able, because the state has failed in its duty to assist us by giving us the instructions so that we might exercise our Second Amendment right fully. I'm going to go off on a tangent here. Imagine if I said everybody has the right to vote. Okay, everybody has the right to vote. I just said it out loud.
Everyone has their obligation to vote.
Well,
it's an
no,
obligation.
Hold on a second. You have a right to vote, right? Okay, it's tomorrow.
Where?
No answer. You're not getting the answer. We're not telling you where to vote. So how can you exercise your right if the government doesn't come along and say, "Hey, these are the things that you
These are our standards."
Right. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state.
How do we go about doing that? But we'll go through the training first, and we'll come back to that, because that's a key point.
It also, you start going to things, that the National Guard focused on. Some things that we ran into, some things of chain of command. If the militia ever were to be mustered by the governor, they would have to fall into a chain of command. That is a very foreign concept to people, but it is also a very important concept.
It's not too dissimilar from the chain of command of corporate USA.
Correct.
But unfortunately, the corporate USA chain of command is up a gum tree.
It's practically the same.
Yeah,
it really is.
But fundamentally, it's the same.
Well, and the same thing, that's why we use uniforms and rank as a training aid so that our volunteers can easily recognize those if ever they were needed to. And also, simple things as, weapon manipulation, clearing jams and stuff, because as part of being well regulated is that you can't operate effectively a weapon, and so,
and more importantly, the weapons that we're using are commonly available in common use, semi-automatic firearms, and they are of a category that is currently being discussed to be banned. That is still on the agenda. And so it's very important that we make it clear that we are exercising our right to use those implements because they are the most suitable implements for service in the militia that we have at our disposal. Those are the firearms that we are using
in the historical context that we are now in.
Right.
Well, the funny thing about that is you see this so much out there is people say, well, weapons of war shouldn't be in the hands of citizens. Well, first off, every weapon is a weapon of war at the end of the day. But what I was going to say, number two, is I don't think people quite understand the whole purpose of, say for me, was an M16. M16 is essentially like the AR-15 when you come down to aesthetics. It looks a lot like it. Now, the functions are a little bit different. On the M16, I had a 3-round burst, but you take away the 3-round burst, and essentially that is the AR. Now, that at the end of the day is not a very powerful rifle. It isn't meant, and this is the argument, oh, you got these weapons that are meant to kill. And no, they're not meant to kill. They're meant to maim. They're meant to injure. And why is that? Because what is more effective? Having a squad of 50 soldiers and killing 20 of them and leaving 30, or injuring 15 of them and taking away another 15 to have to tend to those 15. You're expanding more resources. You're using more time and energy by wounding somebody than you ever are by killing them.
Right, but those are tactical conversations.
Well, they are tactical. But what I'm saying,
bullet design and so forth.
But what I'm saying is the terminology and the language that they use. They don't understand in the least what they're saying. So what I'm trying to get to people that are listening is when you come upon these arguments is understand these people have no earthly idea what the frick they're talking about. Most of them don't
None
even know
whatsoever.
what AR stands for. So that's the narrative that's been pushed.
Armor-light rifle.
They think it means assault rifle. They have
Right.
no earthly idea.
So I would argue that we stop running away from these terms, weapons of war. I think anybody who wants to reestablish the Republic of our founders and defend individual rights should absolutely seize ownership of the term weapons of war, because the militias of the several states and the individual citizens' right to keep and bear arms, it was made emphatically clear in the 1792 Militia Acts, in the Constitution itself, during the constitutional conventions, the ratification conventions in the several states. It was emphatically clear that the firearms, the intent of keeping the firearms was for the purpose of service in the military, in the militia. And so the category of weapons, of firearms, that civilians should have access to are those that are suitable and equal to those of the firearms that the standing army has access to. So if we take this argument to the logical conclusion, things such as the 1934 National Firearms Act, the 1968 Gun Control Act, the Hughes Amendment, FOPA, and several other acts should be determined to be unconstitutional, because those firearms that are banned and controlled by those acts are actually the firearms that the civilians, citizens, soldiers should have access to in order to be on parity with the soldiers of the standing army. The original intent was for the militias of the several states to be more powerful than any standing army that the federal government could assemble. Now, people say things like originally...
there goes the musket theory, by the way.
Right. So that absolutely. So let's deal with some of these things. I've heard this administration say, well, people didn't have access to cannon. That's absolutely incorrect. In fact,
Spike Cohen will tell you
on April 19th, one of the orders issued was to seize shot powder and cannon. And there were several cannon that had to be hidden from the British soldiers on their march through Lexington and Concord. And they say, well, they make a joke. Folks say, well, do you think every citizen should have the right to have a battleship? Well, if we go back to the foundation of our republic, the Continental Congress went to the individual citizens and they said, hey, we don't have a navy. We need you to take your sloop, your frigate, your trading vessel that is equipped with cannon, and we need you to now function as our navy. And over 6,000 privately owned vessels were impressed by the Continental government, Continental Congress, and acted as our navy until we could establish our own navy. And they were able to do so because their vessels were the equivalent of battleships of the day. They were armed with cannon. And so this argument that we should be limited to bolt-action rifles or single-shot rifles absolutely holds no credibility if you look at the text, history, and tradition of militia service and the historical traditions of what weapons and firearm systems that citizens had access to at the dawn of the founding of our country. Does that mean everybody can have a backpack nuclear device? That's absolutely ludicrous.
But the Second Amendment still guarantees that.
I would argue
it's still an arm. It's still an arm.
I would argue otherwise, and this is why. It takes the cooperative effort of a society to develop the technology and the systems infrastructure in order to build and deploy a backpack nuclear device. Maybe someone like Elon Musk might have the resources and the technical capability at his disposal to do it. And if anyone ever did, I guess that would be the time to have a discussion as to whether or not a backpack.
Yeah, it's all hypothetical
right,
anyway,
exactly.
Essentially. But, even when it comes down to automatic machine guns, like I should be able to go down the road right now and go to my local Walmart or general store and be able to pick up a squad automatic assault 249 machine gun. And why? And people's argument will be, well, if you have that, then anybody else can have it, and they'll go out there. Well, I'm not going to use that on another person because my first thought is, well, my neighbor might have one as well. That's the thing about it. As an armed society, as a polite society, why do you see so much gun violence in cities? It's not because of weapons. Well, essentially, to some degree, it is. It's because the criminals have them, and the law-abiding citizens don't. And the law-abiding citizens are scared to fight back on the criminals because they'll end up going to jail for it. You know what I mean? Like
the only argument I would have against that, or actually support that, would be the Mexican cartels. And there we have something that's run amok. Well,
who do you think gave them those weapons?
That's another rabbit hole.
It is,
you know,
and which is why we should have those. Is because of situations like that. It's because, well, what if the United States military is completely knocked obsolete in 24 hours for whatever the case may be, whether it be communications is down or whether it be some of our main bases are completely wiped out and nuked. Like, we as citizens, in order to defend what's left, should be able to have access to these sort of things without, of course it's going to be expensive, and I understand. Look, no matter what you put onto the streets, bad people are going to get it, and those bad neighborhoods are going to still keep killing each other. If you take away guns completely from Chicago neighborhoods, they're going to be out there with knives. You take away knives, they'll be out there with fists. You take away their fists, they'll be out there with their feet. I mean, it does not matter. That is a cultural issue. It's not a weapons issue, and I think that's the point that people need to understand.
I don't think we should go down. I don't think we should go down that road and that argument.
Well, I'm just saying, as a law-abiding Second Amendment person, I should have the right to just about everything that the military has, because that's the sole purpose behind it, is to be able to stand up to a tyrannical government. So if my own very government that has all these weapons that are being paid for my tax dollars, should they decide to turn around and become tyrannical, as if they hadn't, then I should have every bit of right to own those same weapons to be able to defend myself against those people, which I'm hoping it's a foreign, if it ever is anybody's foreign, but I'm saying hypothetically speaking.
But it's all hypothetical.
So that is correct.
Away from hypothetical.
That is correct. You should have access to any man-bearable firearms. Weapon systems, THAAD, Patriots Defense Systems, ICBMs. That's ludicrous. That's a whole
other conversation.
Right.
Yes, absolutely.
So what you're talking about is supported by the founders. Thomas Jefferson said, "I prefer dangerous freedom over peaceful slavery." Society exists under three forms sufficiently distinguishable: without government, as among our Indians; under governments, wherein the will of everyone has a just influence, as in the case of England, and in a slight degree, and in our states in a great one; under governments of force, as in the case in all other monarchies and in most of the other republics. To have an idea of the curse of existence under these last, they must be seen. It is a government of wolves over sheep. It is a problem not clear in my mind that the first condition is not the best, but I believe it to be inconsistent with any great degree of population. The second state has a great deal of good in it. The mass of mankind under that enjoys a precious degree of liberty and happiness. It has its evils too, the principal of which is the turbulence to which it is subject. But weigh this against the oppression of monarchy, and it becomes nothing. Even this evil is productive of good. It prevents the degeneracy of government and nourishes a general attention to the public affairs. I hold that a little rebellion, now and then, is a good thing, and as necessary in the political world as storms in the physical. That was a letter that Jefferson wrote to James Madison in January of 1787. So it directly affirms exactly what you're saying. They understood that it's in order to have freedom, to have liberty, that means life is a little bit dangerous. We can't all have a safe zone. We can't have a safe space. We have an individual right to freedom, but we have an individual responsibility to protect those
responsibility,
freedoms.
That's the key word.
And that's where the well-regulated part comes in as citizens. Was there anything else you want to talk about for training, Jeremiah?
One thing that people, when I talk to people, they see everything that's going on. They're concerned. They feel like they're losing their country. one thing that I keep reminding people time and time again is that, the founders did not declare independence until July 2nd. Up until July 1st, 1776, they were still petitioning the king as Englishmen to recognize their grievances.
And they did that for 20 years, too, which I don't think people can understand. The revolution just didn't pop up.
I mean, you got to think.
They petitioned for decades.
April 19th, 1775 was Lexington. July 2nd, 1776, well over a year. They were still petitioning, they were fighting, and they saw that themselves still as Englishmen who wanted their government to recognize their rights as Englishmen.
I still view that war as a complete.
Think about your words carefully.
Some view it as a localized English Civil War.
Yeah. It was possibly the first Civil War.
In this country, in North America.
Possibly the first Civil War.
Well,
in North America.
Documented. There are probably tons of natives.
But anyway.
Well, so
contentious.
I'm just and this is the problem with our culture is you can go tit for tat forever. You have to find that area where you can all be grounded in, you know what I mean?
And that's why we need to get back to ground is the fundamental individual rights. Because really, if everyone focuses on their individual rights, then this whole narrative of like, you have a right to safety. No, you have a right to protect yourself.
Yes.
And I think I had a really good point in my head, and I just completely. Oh yeah. With the revolution, like I was saying, it took about 20 years for it to finally come to fruition. But at the same time, I don't think, and this is something else that I know I didn't learn in school that you have to find sometime after the fact, but I don't think people can quite appreciate or grasp the seriousness of what our founding fathers really did. I mean, they signed their papers to that document all with the understanding that they had just signed their death warrants. It was not a very popular movement. In fact, much of the country was perfectly content with sticking around and standing under the thumb of British assholes like this one over here.
George III, who was a completely certifiable
absolutely.
lunatic.
They were still fine with that. It was only a third of the population, if not less than that.
3%.
And they all thought there was no way they could win that. And in fact, honestly, if it wasn't for Simon's friends in France coming over and hooking us up, then I'm not sure we could have defeated his ancestors. Well, I mean, Simon, speak up because that didn't come through the headphones. What did you say?
I was lip syncing.
Okay. But I mean, that's the truth of it. Like they had no earthly, when you think that you can't do anything, when you think that it's useless, when you think that there's,
it's a forlorn hope.
Don't, because you never freaking.
A lot of people believed that they had the best that the world offered as Englishmen. They were free as Englishmen. It was a very
under the crown.
Yeah. Because,
and the stamp packs.
Well, because you got to also think, that they had the history of the Magna Carta.
Yep.
They had also common law. They had precedent. They also wanted to hold on to that. And what they did is that they didn't go off half cocked. The founders formed local governments that sent representation to the First Continental Congress, the Second Continental Congress. They petitioned.
They did everything they could to avert conflict.
Whereas opposed to, you see the French Revolution, where it was
off with
mobs.
Heads.
Yes, exactly. Because the mobs went on the street, wanted blood. And what did you have afterward? You had Napoleon. You had a tyrannical dictator. So, everyone can, kind of sits back and says, oh, the American Revolution, the French Revolution were the same. No, they were complete opposites.
Very much so.
And what we're attempting to do is have our grievances heard. We are utilizing the system that the founders gave us to petition our grievances. We are utilizing the state statutes, the federal statutes, to exercise our rights. But at the end of the day, the foundational principle is in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. When a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object and vices are designed to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and provide new guards for their future security. How can we do that if we do not have the militia of the several states? It is our duty, it is our responsibility to the Republic. It is a responsibility to our individual liberties and rights granted to us by the Creator to exercise all of our rights, among them volunteer service in the militia.
Touche. I mean, that encapsulates everything that we need to know.
I tell you what, I'll be honest with you. I mean, sitting here listening, and honestly, what I want to do, I want to go on for hours and hours and hours for a couple of reasons. One reason is sitting across from Brian right here, I'm reminded why, although law school was a dream, it was a complete and total pipe dream. There's no way in the world I could sit here and be this thorough. I really couldn't. I mean, honestly, it's not built. Like, I wanted to be a lawyer. There's no way in the world. You've got it. I want to sit here and I want to go. I mean, and I think it's necessary we come back around and we have more shows talking about this, more shows diving down into this. What I want to do now, because we've gone 2 hours here, I want to break off and go to the after show real quick because I want to ask a couple of questions for our Twitter audience and for our subscribers, and that way it can be a little bit more loose tied, and we have more questions and more for the next show. You know what I mean? Like for the people that want to tune in, I think we've got a good base right here. What I want to do though, before we jump into the after show real quick, is I want y'all to talk about, you have an event coming up here very soon here in Franklin County, and I want people to come out for this because it's a Veterans Day thing, and me as a veteran, I want to show up because I have been sitting here, like, y'all have really, y'all have moved me to an extent that I honestly didn't think I would be, and I'll explain this, is when I thought about the militia, and I've met a handful of you guys, but the most ardent has been Simon, who has been here beside me for a good straight year now. So in my mind, I'm sitting there thinking, if I go to a militia event, it's just 50 Simons running around in circles, and I don't know if I can. I don't know if I. But that's not absolutely the case at all. Like, unlike Simon, you all are professional and you're courteous. No, Simon's courteous. I'll give him that. But I mean, you know what I mean? Like this has been a phenomenal show, and it has opened up my eyes to something that I hadn't questioned it a lot. I hadn't really bothered Simon about the ins and the outs for the main reasons because I'd planned on having a show about this where these questions could come to light and I could ask them from an unbiased way. So, I mean, I've encouraged a lot of people after listening to this to reach out to us and find these guys and be a service to your community and be a service to all your, whether it's Franklin County and all the people listening beyond. Do that kind of stuff. Let's talk about the event y'all got coming up here where people can come out and meet up with you all and speak with you all and figure out stuff because it's coming, right?
All right. So we're having the Support and Defend the Constitution, a Franklin County Militia Incorporated Veterans Day rally. That is November 11th from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And we are having several speakers, which they'll start speaking at 1 p.m. Brian will be delivering 2 speeches, as well as the president of VCDL is also speaking. It'll be Franklin County Militia Incorporated's open house. We'll have tables set up. Multiple different groups and teams within the militia will be presenting on their subject matter experts, and that will allow everyone to come, ask questions, sign up, and that is at the Summit View Park Pavilion at 92 Pleasant Breeze. That is the Summit View Park Pavilion, 92 Pleasant Breeze Road, Rocky Mount.
There you go, right here, and that's on a Saturday as well. So
That's
make
right
plans.
by
It's
Virginia
Veterans Day.
Furniture Market.
Yes, Veterans Day.
Yep.
Precisely.
And you can find us in social media on Facebook.
Yes, we're on Facebook at Franklin County Militia Incorporated. We're on Gab at FCM Inc. VA. We're on X at FCM Inc. VA. And our email, if you want to email us, is join@franklincountymilitia.org. That's join@franklincountymilitia.org.
And so we don't really have a lot of online content. It's because we've spent the past 2 years building out our organization, our mission, and finding our footing, finding out how it is that we can lawfully serve and volunteer in our community and exercise our Second Amendment right to its fullest so that we may provide evidence that we are a well-regulated militia. And we're ready now. We're ready to come out and talk to people. We have nothing to hide. You are more than welcome to look through our bylaws and our articles of incorporation. You are more than welcome to ask questions of our volunteer officer cadre. We have invited other groups in the past to come and observe some of our training. Nobody's taken advantage of those invitations. And so we're putting it out there again. If anybody wants to know anything about what we do, and they want to dive deeper into the history, text, and tradition of lawful militia service, please come to that event on Saturday, November 11th, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. And this also will give you the opportunity to do the right thing, to step up and fulfill your obligation, your duty to exercise your Second Amendment right fully and be well regulated. And that is something that you can do by participating in an organization like ours. You are providing evidence that voluntary service in the militia is not a right that has been abandoned. It is a right that is currently in service. And because of that, it would give us standing against any legislative efforts to take away certain categories of firearms. If you don't step up and do as the founders required us to do, you are not defending the Constitution. You are not fulfilling your obligations or your duties under the Second Amendment. We have individual rights, but we also have individual responsibilities. FCM Incorporated would like to invite you to attend this Veterans Day rally.
Well, I can tell you, I'm gonna make my way there. So for anybody else who wants to come out there and join us for the podcast, come out there and listen. I'm a little saddened that as a veteran, Simon didn't reach out to me to speak on this day, but I assume that
I did actually.
No, you didn't.
You
I was gonna
dirty.
say,
Yeah, I did. You dirty.
No, you didn't.
kid.
When did you
Yeah.
ask me to come speak? I have so much to say.
There's also booth space available still, you know.
We could do that as well. I think that's a good I didn't know there would be booths set up or anything to that nature. This is all.
That I didn't know, but I think we need to be there.
Oh, absolutely. We'll set up a booth if that's going to be the case, and I will set up a booth for Veterans Day. So come out for veterans if you're a veteran. If you want to come out here and
Share a story.
Share a story. Absolutely. You know, in fact, if we've got a way to set up electricity, we'll just set up the equipment and we'll do a show as well. So if you are a veteran, no matter what war it was, come on by and hang out and talk to us. I'll invite some of the guys that I've had on the show before, some of my veteran buddies to come out there and we'll make an event out of it. This sounds like a great idea. Come out, because this is kind of stuff I support. This is kind of, you know, and you can label it all you want to, and I don't really care how you label it. But for me, you know, take care of yourself, take care of your neighbors, and take care of your community. And all this is an organized
that's
way
exactly
to do that.
what-
It's an
it's
organized way to
exactly
do it.
what
So this is
FCM
exactly what we're
does.
preaching about. So, we're going to jump on to our after show real quick. It'll go on for about 20 minutes. We'll ask some Twitter questions. If y'all can just stick around for a few minutes.
Sure.
I want to get y'all back on here again. This is not the first time I've had such a good time with this. For anybody that wants to listen, I'm going to ask some questions because, like I said, I'm a veteran and I have a lot of questions I want to ask. I'm going to ask some questions coming from my point of view that are going to be in the after show because we can let our we can unloosen our ties a little bit on After Shoot. We can curse a little bit because it's subscriber only. So if you want to listen for the questions on X that you've provided, go to patreon.com/getontap. Look, it's only $3 a daggone month. That is 10 cents a day. I'm not even asking for a quarter. Not even a phone call 20 years ago. All I'm asking for is a dime a day for $3 a month. And you can give more if you want to. If you say, well, hell, I'm shitting in high cotton, then come over there and give me $5 a month. Or
I've never heard that expression. That was a good one, Billy.
Yeah, $10 a month. Look, everything you do is going back into our community one way, shape, or form. And if you want any evidence of that, just go ask my wife, because, you know what I mean? I put a lot into this podcast. It could be going to other things for my family, because I believe in what we're doing here, and I believe in what you guys are doing. I believe in what our neighbors are doing. I believe what people at Melvin's Farm to Fork are doing. You know, all that, like what we're doing here. So we need your support. So go to patreon.com/getontap. You can hear the last 30 minutes of this episode or so. We're going to ask some questions. We're going to curse a little bit. We're going to have a good time. So
turn up on Saturday. If nothing, to hear the speaking events. If you're worried about your time, and I know everybody's time is very important, particularly at weekends, turn up at 5 to 1 and start listening to the speaking engagements. Let's just have a mass support of what we're trying to achieve here.
And I will say there will be food.
Okay, good. That's another plus. All right.
Gentlemen, I want to take this opportunity to say thank you for allowing us the opportunity to talk to your audience and to get our ideas out there in the public forum. And I truly appreciate that you invited us with no prejudicial ideas about who we are or what we're all about.
For Simon, Brian, Jeremiah, patreon.com/getontap. Catch our after show. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We didn't signal while changing lanes. They pulled him over, found her cocaine. Said I love you, yes I love you forevermore. If you tell that policeman that cocaine load is yours. He spent time locked up, she ran around, everyone knew it, small country town, while he lay rotten, Lord, she was blowing on his door. And the day ashes to ashes, and you know it's dust to dust. Just another low down woman that a man can't trust. forgotten? Did she still care? He called up her mama, Lord, and these words he heard her cry. Lord, that no good daughter of mine spend all your money on cocaine, overdosed and died. Lord, it's ashes to ashes, and you know it's dust to dust. Just another low down woman that a man can't trust. In the spring, one sunny day, my good gal left me, and she went away. Now she's gone, I don't worry, because I'm sitting on